Hello, welcome to the Fair Deal Democrats podcast. We believe in a fair shake for everyone, just like the sign says. My name's Josh Kilroy. I'm your host. Today, I want to talk a little bit about Uber and providing transportation options, particularly in big cities. So let me just start by mentioning two things. When I was starting my career in political consulting, I would go from campaign to campaign, and there would be downtime, usually 3 to 4 months. And during those downtimes between, say, 2005 and 2009, I probably drove a few, at least maybe 15 months full time, spread out over those 4 or 5 years. The second thing, and that was in Chicago. The second thing to know is that I hate Uber with the passion of 1,000 burning suns. I just, part of it is I hate any of the big tech monopolies, and Uber certainly qualifies as a big tech monopoly. It has about 75% of the ride sharing business in the United States. It used its monopoly power to inflate prices for customers and decrease wages for drivers, among many other things. At this point, they have taken over the institutions that should be regulating them, which is known as regulatory capture. And they use these rules now to crowd out competitors. To be fair, taxis are monopolies, or were monopolies. Technically, they still are to drive a cab. And they tried to use their authority early on to stop Uber from getting a beachhead in many of the major cities. But they are underfunded. I mean, most cab drivers are working class people. They do not have the money that Uber had, the billions in investment, venture capital that they used to get to reshape the rules governing private transportation, ride sharing over the course of the 2010s. So they were able to move in. The taxi industry was ripe for change. As a driver, I routinely said, why are we charging the same rate on a Saturday night or a rush hour that we charge on a Monday or Tuesday night, typically the slowest times of the week? At least we could have gotten rid of the flagpole, which is that first $2 or $3 that you pay just for stepping into a cab. But certainly they could have done a lot more to make cabs more appealing to customers and increase ridership for the drivers. So let me talk a little bit about what I think we need to do to change things. So there are three things. One, I do think that cities need to really go through how they regulate the cab industry now and really figure out, protect or not protect, but encourage a thriving alternative to Uber with the cabs they already have on the streets. Right now, most of the cab rides during the day, during the week when most cab drivers are out, a lot of them are now paratransit. So they're taking vouchers to drive people to the hospital, for instance, or doctor's appointments. And they've lost a lot of the business that was downtown or to the airport. So, again, it's the cab's monopoly. They were, at least in Chicago, there was a lot of, or in New York especially, there was a lot of Russian money that came, bought up a ton of medallions. There was a lot that could be criticized. But on the other hand, it really was an opportunity for particularly new immigrants to get a foothold in the American dream. So it would be me, coming off a campaign, working with politicians and with my PhD, working alongside, you know, people, freshly here in the United States from particularly Africa. A lot of Nigerians were driving when I was driving. But again, Uber is awful. Cory Doctorow talks a little bit about Uber in his book, Inshitification. And there's been a lot written about how Uber used the tens of billions of dollars, over 30 billion in venture capital funding to artificially lower the price of their service until they drove out all of their competitors. I do remember in 2016, 2017, when I was working on a campaign in Los Angeles, I lived a good 7 or 8 miles from the office. And there was my car, it was parked overnight, and I didn't have a car for a couple of weeks. And so I used Uber. The cab industry in Los Angeles was not particularly well developed to service people in my neck of the woods. So, but this was at the peak of Uber subsidized rides, and I would get rides that were like $1.50, $2 sometimes, and to the point where I would pull out $5 at the end and just give the driver cash because I knew he was losing money taking the ride, or he wasn't making a living based on the money he was getting from me. I gave him a tip, sort of and just direct cash. Uber couldn't get their grubby little hands on it. That worked. That strategy worked. It drove a lot of people out of alternatives, and it created a monopoly situation. So, what are we going to do now? Now that they are monopolists, they are free to set the price, both the price they pay, the wages they pay drivers, and the price they charge to customers. And there's been a lot of sort of, focus on laws that treat Uber drivers like employees, guarantee a minimum wage. Those laws are really tricky and hard to make work, and they haven't, by and large, worked so far. So, we really need to think outside the box. And, there are things that we can do, that municipalities can do to promote a thriving taxi industry. It certainly will not recapture the large market share that it had, for rides downtown, in downtown Chicago, like they did when I was driving. But, there are markets that they could, be very successful at. Institutional customers, hospitals, like I mentioned, places where there is a steady, ongoing demand for rides, and where you want consistent providers, right? I mean, Uber is always going to catch as catch can, but you can work with taxi providers to have riders available at certain times. Hospital, a higher share of the airport rides, for instance. So you can also, most cities have developed apps for their cabs, but there's still much work that can be done for that. And frankly, just promote it. We have it in Chicago. We have an app, but nobody knows about it. And it doesn't get people's attention. Certainly the city could invest in promoting their rider app for their cab industry. So, and then again, like I mentioned up front, rides should be a little more expensive on Saturday night or Friday night, when you can just cruise the main strips of bars and whatnot, and pick up customers. But you have to be careful with the pricing, because one of the competitive advantages that taxis still have is that they are cheaper in situations of high demand. than Uber is. It would be nice to, uh, raise the rate per mile maybe by $1 on premium times, Friday and Saturday night, maybe rush hour in the morning or something. But and still keep it much below the rates that Uber charges. Over and above working with the local taxi industry, there are Uber alternatives that are being squelched. Like I said, Uber is using the money they've raised, their using the regulations to keep out competition. The most clearest case of that was in Washington, D.C., where there was an ongoing saga for several years. There was an app called Empower. And basically, the idea behind Empower was instead of taking a cut of each ride, it would charge their driver a flat monthly fee. And then the drivers would charge what they wanted and keep 100% of the money they got. And so that enabled them uh, to provide cheaper rides, but still earn more because they were keeping everything that was coming in. And Washington, D.C., rather than working with this alternative to make sure they had some legitimate concerns about insurance, for instance, but instead of working with Empower, they set up all these ridiculous requirement hoops and set up a fine structure. Would have provided an alternative for many of their citizens. The third thing I'd like to raise is an old idea that I think is due to be revived, and that is the old school jitney service. That never caught fire in many parts of the country, but it was big in New York City through like maybe the 70s, 80s, 90s. Basically, a jitney service is just a car. Usually was a 10 to 12 seat minivan of sorts, usually used, usually run by, again, it was what they would do is they would basically shadow the main public transportation lines, busy bus routes and things like that. And they would it would be $1 a ride. You paid the driver directly, and you got to move at the speed of a car instead of the speed of a bus. And the customers would save money, and the drivers could make, a decent living. The jitneys had a terrible time sort of, gaining a solid regulatory foothold. The public transit agencies hated them because their strategy was deliberately to go down the major thoroughfares that the buses would take, for instance. So they were, from the point of view of the transit agencies, poaching their customers, but it got people home quicker. A lot of people preferred being in a comfy van as opposed to a city bus, for instance, or taking a cab, right? So we really need to open up the playbook here. We cannot have a significant proportion, a key mode of transportation dominated by a big tech company, any company for that matter, but a big tech company that again manipulates algorithms to squeeze customers, to squeeze their employees, let's call it what it is, deprive us of choices. So we really need to think about, propping up alternatives that can work. We need to really be savvy in how we regulate things, and if we do that, we can give citizens. I'll put a link to like the Reason article in the notes on the Substack, but please take a look. I'm not a libertarian, even though I've talked about like easing up regulations here. But sometimes libertarians have good ideas. But I do support cities working with their cab industries to keep them viable because we need those alternatives. Monopolies are no fun. They weren't fun when they were cabs. They aren't fun when it's Uber. Thank you for joining us. Have a great day. Talk to you next time.